It is my tremendous pleasure and honor to welcome our guest for today, a distinguished professor, Dr. Rachida Justo. She is a professor at IE Spain. Those of you who are in Europe, I'm sure you're familiar with IE. Those of you who are in North America, if you're not familiar with IE, or those of us in Asia, IE is one of the top business schools in Spain. She has a PhD also from Spain, Universidad Autónoma Madrid. She's associate editor at Journal of Business Venturing, and she's the 2024-25 division chair, so incoming division chair for the entrepreneurship division of the Academy of Management. She was the program chair at the Academy of Management, the entrepreneurship division last year. And with that, Rachida, welcome.
Thank you very much. So let me try to share my screen. Let me know if you see it in which, no, you're not seeing it appropriately here.
I'm seeing the whole thing.
Yeah, that's why. So let me try it again. Sorry about that. The problem is that I have two screens, so that's why sometimes it can get a little bit messy. Let's see. I think now I got it. Is it working now?
Yes.
You have just one screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, so again, thank you for having me, Vishal. It's a real pleasure to be talking a little bit about my personal path and my personal journey, and also my research interests. I'll try to keep it short, although I have a lot of things to say, and happy to take questions, comments. So just quickly to give you a little bit of background of my who I am and why I'm calling this the diary of three athletes. For two reasons. First, for personal reason, and also with respect to the institution in which I'm working, I try to focus on the parts that I think could be useful for you when you think about your journey and as a scholar, but not only short term, but also long term, because I'm sure you've already have received a lot of very insightful tips of how to think about publishing, this kind of things, but maybe this could give you a more holistic approach, hopefully, on what it means to be a scholar. So in terms of why three athletes, as I said, first, the personal part is that I have three allegiances, if you want, in terms of nationality. I was born Dominican, 18 years old, turned Tunisian, North Africa, and then became also French. Because married a French guy, and I live in Spain. So kind of all over the place. It's fun, but sometimes it's also, it can be a little bit challenging. But mostly I love that part. And then the other part of the three athlete is due to the fact that I'm in IE University, and IE University is this kind of schools that emphasizes not only being a good researcher, but also being a good teacher. And when I arrived at IE, they would talk about professors that are kangaroos. So you have to be a guru in something and have a baby guru in something else. So a guru in teaching, but then baby guru in research, or vice versa. And then they probably thought that it's not enough. So they decided to go for three athletes, which also includes the outreach, the capacity to do outreach and to be a good manager. And so that's a little bit what I've been striving for, to do these three things, or maybe four things, the best I can. And I'll try to walk you through how I navigated that part. And so in terms of research, when I started working at IE, back in the days, I started, I'll tell you about it more in details, but I started thinking about aspects related to female entrepreneurship, their non-economic goals, and also social entrepreneurship. And now it's becoming a very, important topic. But at the time, I was called in a friendly way by many of my colleagues at IE this is Rachida. She specialized in lost causes like social entrepreneurs and female entrepreneurs. So that's a little bit how I began and what I started being known for. I'm happy that this didn't disturb me much, and I continued on that path, and I'll tell you how that ended up. But in essence, in terms of like what I've been focusing on from the start, I started doing my research on female entrepreneurship, but also very quickly on that led me to think more broadly about how and to what extent entrepreneurs might have goals that go beyond just those of making money. And naturally, I drifted into social entrepreneurship, which also was very much influenced by my personal upbringing, family upbringing. A social activist, founding several NGOs related to gender empowerment, a father that was a politician. So kind of these kind of things, shape who you become. And even though I decided to go for business, to do something that my parents didn't do, I did integrate a little bit of the discussion we had at home into the research question that I had. And I've done some research at the intersections of these 2 points, of these 2 elements. So I started looking at gender and exit, gender and self-employment, and also the methodology to try to design, to understand social entrepreneurship and identify social entrepreneurs, mainly with the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor projects that I was involved into. I've been also guest editor for some of the first specialists on social entrepreneurship, and had several papers on the intersection, as I told you, of both topics. And then, because it's also something that speaks to the non-economic goals of entrepreneurs, I also drifted into family business, but also because I've had a co-author that is in my school working a lot on family business. And so we started doing some work there. She dragged me into family business. I dragged her into gender and social impact, even though she came from, hardcore governance strategy angle. So it was an interesting collaboration there. And we had, and we continue on having several papers at the intersection of these topics. In addition to several books, book chapters and even some teaching cases and other type of journals and magazines. Just to kind of start with my starting point and my thesis, I would really see my thesis as trying to debunk a little bit the female underperformance hypothesis. I worked on, I started delving into research on female entrepreneurship and quickly realized that everything about female was negative. And in particular, the fact that they tended to, or at least they were seen as failing more. And so I started digging into this paper, and I realized that actually the way this variable was measured when they were talking about failure was more about either the entrepreneur not being in the company anymore, or the company closing without necessarily digging into what are the reasons behind this closure, which is why I talk about female entrepreneurship and exit, because I saw that there was a very emerging literature in entrepreneurship that wasn't talking about female, that was trying to really disentangle what does exiting means or failing mean, and separating voluntary exit from outright failure. And one of the first insights from that thesis were that indeed females exit more businesses than male, but actually they tend to exit, they are more likely to exit also companies that financially go well and leave it for personal reasons, either because they realize that this balancing act of work and family is not necessarily achieved through entrepreneurship, and sometimes also simply because they are much more sensitive to disagreements with co-founders, or because they have to take care of a family member. So many other reasons, or have a better, more stable job, which explain a little bit more this higher closure rates or exit rates than males. So that was my first study and my first paper. And the other study that is also reflected in some of the figure that I presented was also kind of trying to understand what it means for females to network, and there was at the time this very big call for female to be more effective at networking, to expand their networks, to go for more professional networks rather than family and friends, with the expectation that the bigger the network, the more appropriate the network for entrepreneurship, the more you will have the performance expectation that you will achieve the performance expectation that you had in the first place. And that with my colleagues started looking, where we had this very interesting data set on microfinance entrepreneurs in Kenya, where we had a lot of details on who do they network with, what kind of interaction they had with the people they were networking with, and how much this affected their performance after the fact. And we realized that actually having the same type of network does not benefit males and females the same way. So there was a bias. So let's say that the same people would give, for example, more advice to male than females, even if they were the same person. And we rely on, and we base our hypothesizing on status expectation state theory, which basically says that depending on your status, you will receive better or advice or better support from the same kind of people. To shape, because we didn't want to shape a completely negative story, and we wanted to believe a little bit in the sense of agency of entrepreneurs, we did also kind of try to see whether this bias can be overcome. And indeed, we found some moderating aspects that make the story not completely negative. The other part also where I was doing research, again, in this case with respect to the non-economic goals and the economic goals, is with respect to family employment and family entrepreneurs. And that's where I was collaborating with my friends Ahira Rai, and we found that it was interesting to have females in this micro family businesses, because they were much better than men at leveraging family employees' commitments, because they had a long-term version, because they had also a way of managing these family employees in a more holistic manner that also affected positively performance. And that was based on data from the Dominican Republic. So that's where I started actually to have fun by looking at data from my home country, which is also something that makes sometimes research a little bit more fun and more close and more personal beyond the topic. And from there, I continued on doing some research on families and how they can make a better table, in this case by, for example, enhancing CSR in family corporations, if they include women directors that come from the family, from a family membership. And that was a paper that came out in ETP. So I'm kind of detailing some of these papers that I was mentioning in my figure. Another one that is very close to my heart too, and that speaks to my other part, my Tunisian part. We leverage a very interesting case that was happening after the Arab Spring, and we were looking at how there is this debate about owning the assets in common or privately through private entrepreneurs is better for performance. And in this case, it's a social enterprise that initially was government owned and then became privately owned, and then was, through the Arab Spring, retaken by force from the community because they were claiming ownership of that of these assets, and we use this to theorize around what we call contested commons and institutional entrepreneurship. And it was real fun because it was the first time I did qualitative research, going to a palm grove in the south of Tunisia, spending time and days with people that were part of that social movement, and it was and starting from there, I started to really become in love with qualitative research. So I'm doing more of that right now. So yeah, and that was published in Journal of Business Ethics in 2020. Something that is more recent now, I'm more and more into impact investing. So I started female entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, family business, and now the movement of social entrepreneurship is giving also an emergence of impact investing as a way to fund this kind of social enterprises. So I'm also connecting a little bit more some of my knowledge there by looking at the role of family entrepreneurs as impact investors. We're seeing this happening a lot in the world of practice, and we're trying to understand why family businesses are more and more engaging in impact investing, and what is the logic behind it and why they're doing it. So we started with a conceptual paper in the European Journal of Family Business, and this is now part of a big research program that I'm involved to, among other things, with the PhD students that I'm supervising. So this is in a nutshell a little bit the kind of papers I've been working on and publishing into, to give you an overview. So as Vishal said, I'm associate editor of a JBV, but I'm also associate editor of JBVI. And for those of you who don't know JBVI, it's kind of it's different from JBV because we're talking about very short papers, so maximum 12 pages long. And these are the kind of paper that are very insightful because you have a new story, new theory to present, or maybe very interesting data that allows you to start exploring some relationships that are insightful, but that maybe the paper doesn't meet the theoretical standards or are not ready for a JBV paper. So you wanna start exploring that through JBVI. So I kind of have these two pronged roles in the two journals. Mostly specializing in both journals on female entrepreneurship as an associate editor, and also social entrepreneurship and impact investing. So that's my research hat. In terms of teaching, I've taught a little bit all over the place, especially at IE, at all levels. Wasn't lucky enough to be able to teach just one thing, but at the same time, this expands a little bit your thinking, and also you never get bored. Now, more recently, I was able, because it's becoming much more popular and demanded by students, to focus just on social entrepreneurship. So that's what I've been teaching for the last 3 or 4 years, although at all levels, from undergrad to executive to company programs. Also very heavily involved in writing teaching cases because our students are very demanding. And also I've been the academic director of a social business accelerator that is led by the second biggest bank in Spain. Real fun work to do because you're really involved directly with active social entrepreneurs, so it's a different kind of animal, and kind of learning from them directly. I generally use this to kind of feel good about myself, like all the nice things students told me after teaching my courses. But this is not the only part of the story. The reality is also this one, and it's actually, to me, speaks a little bit to the gendered nature of entrepreneurship. So when you have students saying that the problem is not you, the problem is that a pregnant woman teaching entrepreneurship, in the observations and the evaluation, it kind of gives you back a reality check of what of how gendered entrepreneurship can be. And also, in addition to the fact that there is this impression that in entrepreneurship, compared to, for example, in finance, we need entrepreneurs to teach you, which is interesting because then you'll see that I've become for many years, department head, and I realized that this is what students say, but then when you put an entrepreneur in front of a classroom, after the 2 first sessions where they're excited by hearing about her story or his story, they start understanding that these people are not able to abstract themselves from their own story and to create frameworks that allows them to think much more broadly about what it means to be an entrepreneur. So it's complicated, right? But let's say that one wild highlight of the last few years has been that after so many years sticking to my passion, despite the fact that at start it wasn't really very sexy to work on lost causes. 2 years ago, we inaugurated the vertical tower at IE, which is the tower where I'm at. You can see that I'm in a very high tower right now. And it was a big event for IE. You can see there is the king and very prominent personalities, politicians all over Spain and internationally coming. And they inaugurated the tower, and they just asked just one professor for all IE to give a master class, and it was about social entrepreneurship. And you can see me there kind of finding my revenge and actually finding some sort of legitimatization that social entrepreneurship is probably not that much of a lost cause. So that's for the teaching part. Again, outreach. These are some of the reports I've been doing for practice and for the European Commission on social entrepreneurship, on impact investing, on family businesses, and it actually also gives a little bit of assurance that our research is also of relevance for practice, and with the appropriate translation and the appropriate wording and the appropriate framing, you're able really to contribute to practice beyond just research. It takes time. It diverts you from research. It's not something that I recommend for people that are just starting, but it's very, very rewarding. And also very rewarding in terms of outreach is to be involved in organizations like the Academy of Management. So Vishal said that I was at the entrepreneurship division. So these are some of the highlights of my years. You can see Vishal with us here joining us as program chair. And we work a lot, but also we have a lot of fun, and we feel like it's a part of a family here. So and then comes management, right? So I didn't choose it, but I was department head, and that was very enlightening to be on the other side of the equation of the screen, if you want, and in an institution. And then you'll see the different forces that are pulling you all from all over the place. So students saying, we don't care about entrepreneurship. Why do you want to force us do it? And we want value for money. Professors that are that were your friends and then hate you because you assigned them classes they don't want to teach. Program management that don't want you to assign the professor to that class that you think is good or that they want to be assigned to, and all of this then coalescing to the management telling you that you have to make entrepreneurship great again, and find ways to become to make IE the thought leadership in entrepreneurship, which I think we are. But we have a lot of responsibility in that sense compared to other departments because of that. So yeah, that's in a nutshell how I'm trying to put everything together. Connecting the dot in one single day is impossible. You try to connect the dot over years, and you say, well, maybe I'm doing something that is coherent overall, but on a daily or weekly or sometimes even monthly basis, you feel that you're completely pulled in from different sides. And this is, of course, a long journey over the years. And then, of course, in the meantime, you have to publish, right? And so it diverts you from being a highly published scholar. That's the reality, and then you have to choose. And I guess I'm putting this because it's fun to do a lot of things. It gives you a sense of completeness. You don't have a dull moment, but also you have to think about what you wanna be. And if institutions like mine are, for example, the right institution for you. It doesn't mean that all of my colleagues do all of these things, but a couple of things they have to do well, for sure. And if that's not enough, I actually launched a chair in social entrepreneurship and impact investing in June 22. It's funded by an impact investing firm, but it was really for me a way to kind of go a step further and take all this knowledge and try to contribute to societal changes by helping those that are engaging in impact investing and social entrepreneurship, and giving them really rigorous frameworks and based on rigorous research to make decisions with respect to how they should make an impact on society. So really this chair is about trying to translate research into practice by engaging with all of these people that you see here. Maybe only 10% are scholars. All the rest are impact investors, people from private equity that want to become impact investors, or social entrepreneurs, and that are listening to us, talking about research, and try to see what that means for their daily day to practice. And that's, I think, something that makes me think and that my research is useful beyond just, being something that serves me as a scholar and helps me do, promote my work and be more successful as a scholar. And the other side effect of that is that you get to really mingle with people you admire. So I have my groupie picture with Mohammed Yunus that I took last year, and that I cherish, that I put in front of me. And yeah, and so my chair is trying to pull together all this research. These are like the 4 core areas that that my chair is organized around. So impact measurement, impact investing, social entrepreneurship, and gender lens investing. And I really try to speak to the whole ecosystem with my research in terms of who I want to speak to, but also where I take my data from and who I collaborate with when I'm in my work in my chair. And these are some of the topics I've been doing research on, and how they connect to some of these different parts of the ecosystem, and some of the publications that are either ongoing that came from there. So because I'm beyond time, just to kind of give you one example, this is one of the first publication we brought from the chair. It's a Journal of Business Venturing Insights paper that is very well received from the practice world, because we're basically giving impact investor very concrete framework, and by the way, designed with impact investors. So I'm using here a methodology called design science, where you are starting with creating a framework based on research. In this case, it's qualitative research, but then you take your framework or your artifact and you test it with actual practitioners, and then you refine the artifact to make it much more representative and enrich it and much more useful for practice. And this was the final outcome, and it's I'm proud to say there's something that impact investors see as relevant beyond the fact that it's been published in an academic journal. And yeah, and with that, I know I rushed a little bit into my presentation, but I hope that throwing all these information at you will elicit a lot of question and speak to at least some of you on different levels. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Rachida. And I think you can stop sharing your screen now so people can see you.
Yeah.
So Rachida, before we sort of open the floor for questions from the audience, which they're already raising their hand, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
What you presented was a lot of things you're doing.
Yeah.
And that is inspiring. Of course, even I was thinking like, okay, how can I, sort of even do some of what she's doing? But how do you manage the time? I mean, every paper takes a long time. Teaching well takes a lot of time. Department chair works take time. Entrepreneurship division work takes time. How are you balancing all this?
Yeah, I mean, when female students come to me and ask me the question, especially with respect to balancing work and family, what I say is that I can't balance everything in a single day. So there is one day when I'm a good mother and one day when I'm a good professional. But then I put them together, and at the end of the year, I said, I think I'm good. I'm relatively good at both. But in one single day, you will feel bad at one of these two aspects. And so if you wanna apply it to the different things that I do, it's exactly the same thing. So for example, you probably know that sometimes I disappear from the email chains of the Academy of Management. And that's where I'm saying, oh, let me focus on the other things. And all of a sudden I answer you with 10 emails to all the emails that you've been sending me. It's probably not the best thing to do, but there is this. And of course, I've presenting things that I've done all over many years. So it's not something that it takes time to kind of overall be able to present a relatively nice picture, but there were times where I was doing some of these things not appropriately or not doing them. So for example, I accepted the Academy of Management Leadership because I negotiated with my school that if I would take it, I would stop being department chair. So sometimes also you can work out these kind of things by saying, okay, this is an opportunity for our institution to be a little bit more out there at the Academy of Management, but then I have to stop being department chair, for example, right? And of course, as I said, I'm not the most prolific researcher ever. So it's just a personal choice because I enjoy being very close to the practice. I enjoy doing relevant research. That probably certainly has made me miss a lot of publishing opportunities. So we have to be very transparent about that, which is why I think it's not something you have to do when you're at an earlier stage of your academic life too.
Okay, wonderful. And then now we'll move to the questions from the audience. Anant, you want to go first?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor. It was very inspiring. And, I was thinking like maybe 10, 15 years down the line, I'd like to tell the same story. Yeah,
you will
so
certainly.
I have also multiple interests. On the first day, I asked Professor Vishal, and he shared his opinion on how do we measure the impact of the research that we are making. I'm based in India, and the entrepreneurs here, they don't read the research paper. Probably they don't. They go to the mentor. They ask for their advice. They ask for their suggestion. And that way, even though I'm interested in social entrepreneurship, my question was, is how do we combine this practitioner mode and research mode, or the practitioner mode is making much more difference than the research in social entrepreneurship or in entrepreneurship?
So Annette, you would be surprised of how much admiration there is for scholars among the practitioner worlds, right? It's just that because we've been historically, and most of us have been turning our backs to practice, there is this disconnect. And of course, it's legitimate that they don't also look at us as relevant for them because we're not trying to be relevant for them, right? So, but the moment you show some interest, the moment you show that you're really trying to learn from them, you would be surprised how open they are to learning from you too. So the reason why I was, and I'm still so heavily engaged in social entrepreneurship, is that when I started doing research on social entrepreneurship, it was so new that the only way to understand it was to mingle with social entrepreneurs themselves. There were very few publications on social entrepreneurship back in the days. And that shaped a little bit my research question and my interest. But by mingling with them, because also I wanted to be a teacher that does relevant teaching, but my mingling with them, it also helps me understand in what ways we could translate some of our findings to something that is relevant for them. And this is, for example, one of the reasons why I accepted to be associate editor for JBVI. It's extremely time consuming to be associate editor of one journal, of two journals. It's amazingly time consuming. But I think that JBVI is doing a very good job at being a little bit more easy to sell for entrepreneurs and practitioners. And you'll see more and more is happening there. So it's a little bit more work because you have to have different outputs, right? It's like an AMJ paper is in itself as is not relevant for practitioners, but there are some nuggets that you can extract by maybe writing some sort of summary, or you have more and more now platforms. One of them is EIX, that helps you translate some of your research insight in short, manageable, impactful pieces for practice. So maybe you want to go there and try to see what kind of results you see there. You'll find it interesting for practitioners. It's just a matter for language and taking an extra time.
Yeah, the extra time I think becomes critical.
True.
Fernando, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Justo, for the presentation. It seems clearly throughout the presentation that the words actually passion and meaning are very important and very, centered in your research, because yeah, I believe we should do things that matter first of all to us and then to the people in general. I remember in my first PhD, one of my first PhD seminars, that a professor of mine told us that we should not worry about managerial and practical implications. We should only worry about theoretical implications. I get the point. That's important for the academic world per se, to get tenure and all that stuff. But at the same time, just like you showed in your presentation, this bridge between theory and practice is way important and way valuable to the society as a whole. So my question would be, like, in your opinion, how should we as young scholars, PhD students, and so forth, while we are worried about getting top publications in top journals and getting like the ultimate goal, which I believe it's getting tenure and then pursue your own research agenda, but at the same time, how do you think we should balance this theoretical importance with some sort of practical implications and societal implications, and like, how should we balance that?
So it's a very good point. So I definitely think if you want to publish in top journals, you have to make sure that it's theoretically adding something to a theoretical conversation and to scholarly conversation. I agree with that. But one way actually to do that is also by contrasting some of your interpretations with practice. So just something that is very basic, right? Sometimes we go, especially for a quant, I started as a quant scholar, right? So as quant scholars, we have this data set, we have a theory, we do a hypothesis, and we test them, it's significant, and then we have our interpretation. But sometimes we can go very wild or in a rogue in our interpretations, and when you want to see whether they make sense in practice, they don't make sense at all. And I think that this, trying to see whether on the ground this makes sense, even by doing some interviews, right, and talking to the actual entrepreneurs that you're theorizing about, could make sense. And many of my quant paper where at some point, either through a pilot study or after the fact, backed by some interviews. So you can start at this level, like very low key, but still engaging with practice. So in social entrepreneurship, again, I didn't start with a report, a practitioner report or a consulting report with social entrepreneurship. This came much later, but I was very early on involved in going to business plan competition on social entrepreneurs, networks of social entrepreneurs, the price of the best, and then I would go to talk to social entrepreneurs to try to understand their reality and see whether it matches my research. Okay, the same thing happens for female entrepreneurship. They were asking me to talk in some speeches, inspirational speeches about female entrepreneurship, and then I was presenting my research and say, does it speak to you? Do you have cases of female entrepreneurs that have left their businesses for personal reasons? And so it's just give you some sort of and sometimes they tell you things that you haven't thought about that could be an interesting interpretation, or at least a way to elevate your findings in the discussion. So you can start this way without going very far away from a research-oriented research.
And what you just described can be applied to any research, right? You could be doing that
Absolutely.
with CEOs or managers or workers or
Absolutely.
employees. Yeah. Seema, you're next.
Yes, hi. So the voice is good. Can you hear me well?
Not really.
No. So how about this? This is my voice now.
Is it
Can
me
you-
or do you hear her?
Seema, do you want to type your question in the chat box then? Because the sound is not picking up very well.
Okay, right.
Thank you. Tanya, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Hello, Professor Justo. So I was very thrilled to know that you are from Spain, because the display picture of on one of my messaging apps is a quotation, Spanish quotation that I really like. It's "Poco a poco se va lejos," which means little by little we travel far. So my
Yes.
question is that today we are looking at the future of entrepreneurial research. So how far we have come, I often think about this, that how far the growth of knowledge has brought us. So we began from philosophy, the mother of all sciences. We branched into natural sciences, social sciences, and then we had sub-disciplines. And today we are talking about interdisciplinarity and multiple disciplines. Even within entrepreneurial research, we have so many branches to look at. So are we actually becoming, so we have come full circle. So are we becoming specialists or generalists in entrepreneurial research?
Wow, that's a profound question. Well, I don't know if I'm as optimistic as you are in terms of us getting multidisciplinary. At least in our journals, I think we're still a long way from being really multidisciplinary, and it's not a problem of just entrepreneurship. I think it's also sometimes reinforced by the fact that we need to publish, we need to publish in top journals. So getting away from the comfort zone of even the reviewers or the editor, as myself, right? If you send me a paper with a topic that is completely outside entrepreneurship, I will have to think about who is the appropriate reviewer for this. And the problem that we have is that in each field, each discipline has its own jargon, has even its own way of writing papers. So I have a paper that I wrote with a co-author from OB, HR, and someone from economic environments, from economics. And it was so complicated to get this paper published because even the way we wrote, the way we frame papers was completely different. And let alone like what target journal should we send it to. We ended up sending it to a renowned HR journal that didn't count for my tenure, by the way, because they were looking at me from the entrepreneurship lens. So what I'm trying to get at is that the way I see our field evolving, it's more in terms of fragmentation. So it's like started as mainstream entrepreneurship, and then we started fragmenting it, like institutional entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, environmental entrepreneurship, green entrepreneurship, family businesses. If we can, and I don't know that this would be called multidisciplinarity, and I think we still have a long way to go there. Hopefully we'll get there, but it's still there's still a long way. So it's just in social entrepreneurship, we were debating with Vishal whether I should present something that was related to a new research program that I have about including an ownership lens into social entrepreneurship. But when I say ownership, really thinking much more broadly about what ownership means. So for example, including a lens about cooperatives and commoning and purpose companies that are that have completely different business models from the ones that we know in traditional entrepreneurship, where it's led by one owner or two co-founders, and that is eligible for example, venture capital or private equity. And it sounds kind of novel when I presented it in the social entrepreneurship conference recently, but if you speak to people outside entrepreneurship in critical management studies, for example, or in ecological economics, it's like, of course. So we still have some way to go. The good thing is that because we're much more legitimate as a field now, maybe we can, it's the time for us to take that risk and to venture outside our comfort zone, which is traditional management, if you will. I don't know if I'm answering your question, by the way, but hopefully partly yes.
Thank you so much.
Rachida, before we go to our next question from the audience, Seema sent her question, and I wanted to share that with you because she didn't get a chance to ask. Her question is that she was working on a project looking at female entrepreneurs in MENA, Middle East and North Africa, and looking at the influencing factors and socio-cultural factors using GEM data.
Okay.
But then she stopped working because she didn't know if it was useful or useless, if the journals would be interested. How do you advise junior scholars, PhD students to make that decision in terms of, is this paper worth pursuing?
Wow, again, this is a very broad question. I will have to see a little bit what's the paper about. One thing I can tell, because one of my papers was with the GEM data, is that it's increasingly hard to publish with GEM data. The reason, like at least in top journals, right? The first reason is that the GEM data was not designed. It was designed for a very specific purpose, which was really to compare entrepreneurial rates across countries using a consistent survey. Because what was happening is that some countries were measuring entrepreneurship rates based on self-employment, other on number of small businesses. So it really was not comparable, and that was one of the big contribution of GEM data. Now, as we started publishing papers, a lot of papers with GEM data, we started kind of, how to say that, using all the options we had for top journals in that sense. So unless you have a question in the GEM data set that is specifically designed to address your question, the impression that most editors have now is that people do data harking. They have this data set and they try to build the story around it, right? So again, this is I'm trying to be very open about how people look at GEM data, at least in top journals. It doesn't mean that you cannot publish, because it might be the case that in your case it's really useful. So there is this AMJ paper from Thibault that was based on GEM data. I'm not saying it's not, but you have to make sure that the data is aligned with the story that you're trying to and the research question that you want to answer. The other thing is simply forget about MENA. It's not about MENA. It's not about GEM. It's what is the research question and to what extent is really furthering our scholarship on the scholarly understanding on female entrepreneurship, and answering a gap there, right? Again, I cannot give you a more precise answer unless I see the paper, but this is my quick overall answer.
And Rachida, you bring up a very good issue, and that has come up oftentimes in our virtual summer school as well. People often sort of get focused too much on the context. I am doing my research in, I'll just pick, India, Portugal, Spain, Colombia, Mexico, and forget that's a context. The more important thing is, what's the question?
Exactly.
And why is the context appropriate for that question? And I think that's what you are sort of, that's your second advice to
yeah, and I understand that we want to work on areas that matter for us. As I said, some of the papers I enjoyed the most were one from the Dominican, one from the Tunisia. But I didn't go and say I want a paper on Dominican. No, it was just that I found the research question, and it just so happened that we had access to the Dominican data. So that's how it works.
Yeah, perfect. Enrique, you are next.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor. So my question is definitely less profound than that, but as someone who is very anxious about the future of our profession, I was curious to hear a bit more about how academia and the academic profession in Europe differs from the North American model in things, for example, tenure requirements, the expectations from professors, things like that.
So it depends a lot on the schools and the countries, okay? For example, the public system in Spain would be very different from the private system. And even within the private system, you will have much more teaching schools and others that are research schools like IE. But even IE has made a very aggressive transition from being a purely teaching school to being a research school. And it had completely important implications for the scholars that were at the time there. Some of them left because they didn't fit the mold anymore, and we started having more research-oriented professors that wouldn't fit the mold a few years ago. So it really depends. So you have to do your due diligence on what kind of school you're trying to target within Europe. Okay, but let's say that if I were to generalize, you will have much less pure schools, at least pure research school in Europe than in the US, because in the US you have more models where you have your research school and teaching is completely secondary. I don't know many schools in Europe that are like that. There are some, but they are a handful. Okay, most of them will try to ask you to be focused on teaching too. At least only teaching, because one of the reasons is that we, for example, don't have endowed chairs in Europe. So it's a funding issue, right? Schools cannot afford to just focus on research because we don't have that model, for example, unless, again, it's a public school, but then in public schools also the incentives to publish are very different, and also the salaries are much lower, right? So you have to look at that. The good part of the story, though, is that it can be a less challenging environment in terms of publications. So, for example, in our school, FT 50 list, Financial Times 50 list, is enough for you to get tenure and to be considered the top scholars. I know a lot of schools in the US that would tell you that JBV is not a good journal, right? And if it's not an AMJ, you're out, for example, or an ASQ. That is a strong and stressful kind of, for me at least, environment to be into, because I think that you can make an impact as a scholar by publishing in other journals beyond AMJ and ASQ, which are excellent journals, don't get me wrong, but there is more to that than just these papers. So journal, so there is the pros and cons.
And I think the bigger picture you bring up, Rachida, is that the system, even though academia has become globalized, there are still sort of cross-country, cross-cultural differences, and one needs to decide in which ecosystem they want to operate, right? Spain, US, I don't know, India, Portugal, Colombia, and then make their decisions accordingly. That's what I heard sort of you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Harshita, you want to go next?
Hi, Professor. Thank you so much. I had a question on the qualitative research methods that we do. As much as I'm interested in doing a qualitative research, but I am really scared of starting something like that because of the initial challenges that might be associated with qualitative study. I am not sure because I'm yet to start. So, do you think there are some initial challenges with respect to having a amount of clarity on your research question, on the kind of data that we feed into the software and tools? So, how do we actually ensure that we are matured and clarified enough to start a qualitative research? What are some of the challenges that we initially face, and how do we mitigate such challenges?
Okay, so why do you think there are more challenges in qualitative research than in quantitative research? Does that mean that you're strong with quants? Because it also, this challenge, the perception of challenge is very much shaped by what are the things that you do well or that you feel more comfortable do well. So I'm telling you that because one of my PhD students is completely terrified about doing a quantitative paper because she feels more vulnerable there, right? I don't think it's more challenging. It depends on your strength. What is probably more challenging that I'm hearing from you is that you start a little bit less clear about what is it that you're expecting to find, right? You have to be a little bit more open in that sense, right? And but at the same time, I think that once you get involved into qualitative research, and that's why I said I fell in love with that, you feel much more comfortable making some statements about your findings than when you do it with quantitative research, right? Because in quantitative research, you're interpreting high level data, and you're coming up with mechanism, of course, based on theory, right, and strong theorizing, but still, it's still a little bit of an act of faith. When it's qualitative research, you speak to people, and they're telling you what they think. And by the way, once you finish your modeling, you can go back to your qualitative respondents and show them the model and see whether it rings a bell to them. That's acceptable. It's not prompting them because you already had the interviews, right? And that's fair enough. So maybe one of the things to mitigate these challenges is that we tend often to go in qualitative research with a quantitative mindset and trying to find a confirmation to what we were expecting. And you have to keep that open mindset, because you can discover things that are much more interesting than you thought in the first place. So just to go to the commenting paper that I was talking about in Tunisia. So this was a success case, right? Where these people took back a palm grove that they had, and they created, they took a company around dates and palm grove collection and selling, and they took it from a barely surviving company to a company that was extremely successful and also with a big social impact. And the whole story for us, when we went there, we wanted to understand why this is more successful than your typical entrepreneurial and private ownership model. And when we started doing interviews, these people were big on the media. There are books about them. There are documentaries about them. There are papers about them. And so I was like asking them, okay, how do you explain your success? And we had this very nice model about success in commoning, right? And one of the leaders told me, actually, I don't think it's a success, because in terms of legitimacy, we're still not legitimate with respect to a wider audience, including the government, that this is the way this palm grove should be managed. And they're accusing us of expropriating the previous entrepreneurs because this is much more efficient way of managing the palm grove. And so initially our first reaction was, oh my God, we spent all this month writing a model and it's completely useless. And even our initial theorizing doesn't work. But we decided to look at, and by the way, you will receive the same, it will happen to you also with quantitative papers when you send the paper for review and they tell you, no, this is not a story about, I don't know, institutional dynamics. You have to look for another theory. And you have to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what is my data really telling me? Is this really an institutional dynamics paper, for example? And so we sat down and said, okay, what are they telling us? Tell me more about why do you think it's not a success? Why is legitimacy important? What is happening? And it became all of a sudden a story of contested comments and how they're trying to legitimize common ownership. And what kind of discursive strategy they were having, and how they're acting as institutional entrepreneurs to go beyond just their palm grove and explain why commoning is a model that works in some settings. Of course, it pushed me to delve into theory I had no idea about, which was commoning, and that's where I discovered Ellen Armstrong, who had the Nobel Prize around commons, and that's why actually then I was able to tie it with research on social entrepreneurship, and it was extremely enriching for me. But you have to keep an open mindset about that and try to listen to what they're telling you. Of course, he didn't say it's a commoning and an institutional entrepreneurship paper, but you have to make that connection. So.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachida. We'll go to Shikha.
Hi, Rachida.
Hi.
Actually, my question was, you partly answered that question. I was trying to ask, how did you decide, or how did you come up with the theoretical lens that you've used in the paper? So did the context come first? The study came first? or there could have been multiple lenses that you could have looked at to understand the same phenomena. So how did you choose? So partly I think you've answered that question. Second, I wanted to know, you mentioned design methodology and how you tested it in the practical, with the practitioners. Could you share some insights on that?
I mean, it's long to explain, but basically design science is a methodology that comes from design, okay? And that is now gaining ground in entrepreneurship. There is a paper from Dimo Dimov on entrepreneurship theory and practice on design science in entrepreneurship. And there are several entrepreneurship papers that are now trying to use that, including ours. But in essence is, imagine your typical, even quantitative paper, right? Very often, no, so let me reframe that. It's more often qualitative because you want to design a framework or an artifact, although it has been used in some quantitative papers, but I can speak to the qualitative one. Imagine a typical qualitative study, which is what we did for our JBVI paper, where we wanted to understand how impact investors are trying to support social entrepreneurs by being additional, by furthering their impact, not just giving them money to grow. And what are the best practices, the strategies for that? And so we interviewed, I think it was 25 impact investing firms, typical qualitative grounded theory paper, Joya methods, with categories, subcategories, second order themes, created our themes, created our artifact, our model. And then what we did was starting testing that model. We tested it in class with students. We went to conferences on impact investing and presented our model, and attended other conferences and had other interviews with experts in impact investing saying, okay, this is our model. Do you think it makes sense? Are there other ways in which impact investors are trying to have more additionality? And then we realized there were some parts that didn't come out in our interviews that were important, some others that we had to qualify, to merge, and that's basically design science in essence. So you're testing it on the ground, and some of them used them. Some impact investors that wanted to start into impact investing tried to test that model and to implement some of it, and came back with feedback on what worked and what didn't. That's basically design science.
So it legitimizes the qualitative work or the framework that we are proposing.
It helps you refine it and improve it.
Wonderful.
It's not just to seek legitimacy.
So let's move on to the next question. But before we do that, Rachida, I know we are past the 1 hour. You agreed? Do you have more time to answer questions?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. Yeah, okay. Happy to.
Now we move to Albania. Next questioner is from Albania. Cladiola.
Hello. Thank you, Rachida. It was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I felt connected with your research as well. I'm doing research about barriers that female entrepreneurs encounter, access to finance, cultural basis, family business balance. Have you found in your studies any successful policy implemented in a specific country that was implemented in order to help female entrepreneurs? And can this policy in a specific context be implemented in other countries as well? Or policies are totally directed for a specific context? Thank you.
It's an important topic that I know very little about. So I don't look too much about policies and their effectiveness, to be honest. The only instance where I did look a little bit at the effect of policy was in the case of that paper that I told you that I did with HR and economics folks, where we were looking at the effect of Spanish policy of part-time work that was supposedly used to benefit females to balance. And what we were observing was that actually women that took part-time job, that were in a full-time job and then took a part-time job, or that took a part-time job right away after having kids, realized that they ended up working a lot more than the time that is allocated to them, even outside work, and that they were earning much less money, so they would opt out from work and go into entrepreneurship. So as a result of that policy that was supposed to help women as employees, some of them ended up leaving the employment, the corporate world, and set up their own business because that was for them the only way to balance. So in that sense, what we were seeing is that unless these policies are accompanied by first an enforcement of the actual timing, were not putting an additional burden on them while lowering them the status, and also they have to be accompanied by other policy at the family level, it can backlash. That's the only case where I can really speak about something that I did myself in terms of policies. The other one is, without having done a lot of research on that, and a lot of people are asking themselves the question whether all these assumptions about the fact that entrepreneurship helps women balance are true. And what we know is that it depends on the model of entrepreneurship that is trying to be sold to people, and depending on the country, on the context. So if it's high growth entrepreneurship or your typical mom and pop shop, right? And so policies also are not one size fits all, because there are different type of female entrepreneurs with different type of growth ambitions, with different type of family circumstances, and even socioeconomic circumstances. So that also is important to take into account. But I cannot answer more than that. But as a researcher, I don't want to say something that is not right. Sorry, but I think it's an important topic, though.
Yeah, I agree with Rachida. That's an important topic. And I see in the female entrepreneurship literature, because I do some work there as well, is that, for example, there's this discussion about how childcare is seen as sort of a national responsibility in some of the Scandinavian countries. Now, which may increase women's employment or entrepreneurship or labor market engagement. But can that be, for example, translated into the US, where it's not seen as a national responsibility? So I think with public policy, we also have to sort of be careful about these things. But yeah, much more research needs to be done. So thank you, Rachida, for saying that. Eileen, I believe you are next. Could you also mention where you're from, Eileen? Because I don't think I got that.
Thank you. My name is Eileen Lara. I am originally from Uganda, but currently based in Germany doing my PhD. I am in my second year. Thank you very much, Professor, for the presentation. It was very enlightening. My work is on sustainable business models for gender equality and social inclusion. And I have just collected my data set from my home country, Uganda. So maybe there was a level of bias in terms of data collection. And I was looking only at energy companies and how they empower female entrepreneurs. But when I was checking in the top journals like JBV, ENTP, economic empowerment of female entrepreneurs is not a common topic in both journals, and more or less rural female entrepreneurs. So I had the idea of looking at either resource-based view of the companies, using the resource-based view theory or dynamic capabilities to see how they empower female entrepreneurs, or doing a narrative analysis of the female entrepreneurs. And I wanted to get your thoughts on if you think those theories are good, and if that would be interesting for such top journals as well.
So again, I mean, I see that you try to explain a little bit what you're doing, but it's a little bit too little for me to tell you, yes, resource-based view is a good angle. I will have to look a little bit more. What is your research question? What I would tell you, I immediately noticed that you said, well, I'm doing research on Uganda, so there might be a little bit of bias there. people are saying that enough for you to also kind of throw at yourself that kind of statement. Because you're doing research on data doesn't make it more, research on Ghana doesn't make it more or less biased. I'm very, you know, militant with that, because I remember the first time where, so the Dominican Republic JBV paper was a paper at the time, 2012, was a paper where there were relatively less entrepreneurship paper based on data in developing countries. And I have this reviewer saying, can you tell us why this data is generalizable? And of course, you read papers with data from the US, and nobody asks you why this is not generalizable, because of course, if it's the US, it's generalizable. If it's Dominican Republic, it's not. So let's not do that for ourselves. Let's leave it to the reviewer to make that claim. And then we have to explain that this is a context to test our data. And unless there is something extremely idiosyncratic about Ghana that doesn't apply to other countries, then it should be as generalizable as any paper that is trying to understand, for example, micro enterprises or rural enterprises around the world, right? So that's, you know, sorry, I'm very passionate about that. So I don't want you to kind of lower your own contribution just because it's data, it's Ghana. Actually, the good news is that now data that is coming from non-Western countries is more and more welcome and is sought. So it might be actually giving insights that do not exist because it's coming from a developing country. And if not, read the paper by Pablo Munoz called Entrepreneurship and the Rest. And it's making the claim that most of our views on entrepreneurship are framed by theories that were born in the West, that are made for the West, and that might not be eligible for developing countries. And guess what? Most of entrepreneurship, if you look at the GEM data, happens in developing countries. So it's really time for us to start working on data in developing countries. The rest of your question, I cannot answer. I need to know more about your paper to tell you. But if you're saying female empowering or gender empowerment, there is research on female empowerment, even in this journal. And it's not something alien to people that are doing research on SDG and entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. You just have to have the appropriate data to actually make the case that you're looking at gender empowerment. So that's, and actually you need to go to other disciplines probably to bring it to entrepreneurship, which is fine. I think there is something there that might be useful for us to learn.
Thanks, Rachida. From Uganda, Germany, we now go to Nigeria, USA. John?
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So I was just thinking about when you talk about practitioner-oriented research, I was wondering, a journal like HBR, that's Harvard Business Review, which is listed on the FT 50, I was wondering what's the implication for a young scholar publishing in such kind of journal? Is it really cool?
It depends on the institution that you're targeting for. So you're a PhD student, right?
Yes.
So it depends on where you want to get employed, right? Some more and more schools, mostly in Europe, right, are how to say that, acknowledging and valuing other type of publications, but you have to see what kind of school you're going to and whether it will be valued. Of course, if this is your main or your only publication, it's not enough, right? You need to have like practitioner type of publications. You need to have scholarly journals that are really advancing scholarly conversation. So for me, this is a plus. It's not an either or, okay? And if you had to make an either or, you would go for your typical academic journal, right? But I'm telling you, for example, in rankings right now, in for example, UK, the impact of your research is more and more important to get access to grants, to get promotion. And when I say the impact, is the impact outside scholarship, right? So it really depends. Also, you might want to design also your research and your publications towards the kind of institution you want to belong to.
Yeah, that's a very important point, because in the US system, they, for tenure and promotion, especially early stage, they only count research publications. So it may also be a matter of stage in the career.
Yes. Yeah, it's a matter of stage. I wouldn't have had tenure if I had only practitioners. So even the tenure review letters that I had where, oh, she had these publications, she's doing an impact in scholarship. And by the way, it's amazing how she's doing other things. But it was like, by the way, it's a plus. It's not what got me tenure. But when you go into associate professor and to full professor, then it becomes actually very important.
Thanks, Rachida. From that, we will go to Ritu.
Hi, Rachida. Thank you for the wonderful presentation, especially like walking us through your research journey. It was very, it was very, I could relate to it, and I guess most of us could. So my question is really targeted on your work on gender. Right now, I am researching US listed public family firms, and within that, more broadly, I study governance. But I'm also interested in studying.
I'm studying what? Sorry, I don't hear you well. Awareness.
Governance.
Governance. Okay.
Mainly board, the role of board in family firms. But more specifically for one of my projects, like I haven't started it, I'm looking into it. I'm interested in studying the role of women on these boards in influencing, strategic decisions like investment in R&D or internationalization or other things, right? And since these decisions may be perceived as riskier, and it's more likely that women may be perceived to having like less legitimacy and even appetite for such risky decisions. And to that end, I was also reading your paper on Do Women Make Better Table? And in that, you kind of implore that women need legitimacy and power to influence like corporate social performance, right?
Yes.
And I'm really very much interested in this argument, but I also kind of wanted to extend it using like literature from gender and not from and mainly secondarily from mainstream management or governance literature. So my question, and I'm still like undecisive on which gender framework, but then my question is like, if I'm using gender as my main framework, how will it be perceived by reviewers if I'm sending it to a mainstream management journal just as JBV?
Look, so when I said that gender and social impact were lost causes back in the days, this is no longer the case. Like you have a lot of top publications that are framed completely around gender that are in AMJ and other top journals. So it's not a problem. The problem is whether your theoretical framing fits your research design, fits the hypothesis that you do, fits your data, and it really is telling an insightful story because gender happens across all fields. So the advantage of gender is that you can tell a story that goes beyond entrepreneurship and can be extended to some extent to female managers, female CEOs, or even beyond that. So I don't see it as a problem at all. It's more about how much of a theoretical contribution you're making to gender and to management in general. Don't be concerned about that. That shouldn't be a concern.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Rachida will now move to Sarup, and I think I'm looking at the time here. Maybe that will be the last question of the day because we need to let you go too. Sarup, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, my question is a related question to the quantitative versus qualitative question asked before. So while
I'm not hearing you well, Sarup. Sorry, can you speak a little bit slower and higher and louder?
Okay, yeah. So my question is related to that quantitative versus qualitative research. Yeah. So when approaching a research question with a qualitative methodology, so I often feel this pressure that probably I need to know a lot more theory. Like I'll have to eliminate all possibilities of quantitative method before really going on and selecting. To justify my choice of a qualitative method. And that's a view, not just my view. That's a view kind of I hear from a lot of scholars and professors. So is there some merit in that view, or that's like not the best way to decide on a qualitative method?
No, I disagree. I don't think it was the case before that doing qualitative research was looked upon like, something that is not as good as quant, and qualitative researchers are not as good as quantitative researcher. Is no longer the case. All top journals have qualitative research, accept it, embrace it, but it has to be rigorous, right? Let's say that, and I think it goes back to Harshita's questions. I think that people think that it's easier to do qualitative research because they don't know about it, but it's actually doing good qualitative research is as challenging as doing good quantitative research, right? So if you think your research question is something that elicits and needs a research design that is qualitative, go for it. Because if you try to answer a qualitative question with a quantitative design, people will see it right on, and no matter how sophisticated it is, it will be rejected. Most journals now embrace qualitative research. Just do it well.
Yeah, that's good advice. Just do it well. So Rachida, let me ask you this before we let you go. What's one advice you would offer to aspiring entrepreneurship scholars, such as the participants here?
Oh, one, impossible. One advice. Entrepreneurship scholars or scholars in general, two things. Again, try to know the setting in which you're doing your research. It speaks back to this idea of being involved with entrepreneurs, at least listening to them, and not be completely in your ivory tower, and enjoy what you do. Do something that you like, because this is a very long journey. Sometimes it's a very solitary journey. So if there is no meaning or purpose behind it, at some point you will lose steam. It will happen, right? So do something that is close to your heart.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachida. I enjoyed listening very much to you, and I'm sure
Vishal.
the
I
participants
enjoyed
did
the
too.
questions, by the way. Thank you. The very engaged crowd here. So good luck to all of you.
Thank you. Hope to see you at Babson or AOM.
AOM. Thanks. Bye.